Hello everyone, welcome back to Nightmare Echo. I know most of you use this video to sleep, so relax and drift off as we begin. Tonight, as the rain falls outside your window, we'll explore 7 stories that remind us how fragile our sense of safety can be. These are true accounts of ordinary people whose lives were forever changed by extraordinary circumstances. Make yourself comfortable as we journey through these disturbing tales from across America. The gentle rainfall will accompany us throughout, a constant reminder that even in darkness, there is peace to be found. Let these stories wash over you as you drift into sleep. I'll be your guide through the shadows of human experience. Story 1. On a quiet November afternoon in 2016, in the small community of Mountain Gate, California, a woman disappeared without a trace while jogging near her home. Her name was Sherry Papini, 34 years old, a mother of 2 young children. When she didn't return to pick up her children from daycare, alarm bells began to ring. Her husband Keith came home to find an empty house. Sherry's cell phone was discovered on the side of a rural road, along with her earbuds, neatly placed on the ground with strands of her blonde hair entwined around them. There was no sign of her anywhere. The community rallied. Search parties combed the woodlands and trails. Missing person flyers appeared across town. Keith made emotional pleas on television for his wife's safe return. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to fade. Then, on Thanksgiving Day, 22 days after her disappearance, a truck driver spotted a woman frantically waving for help on the side of Interstate 5 near Woodland, California, about 150 miles from where Sherry had vanished. It was Sherry Papini. The woman he found was barely recognizable as the healthy young mother who had disappeared 3 weeks earlier. She was severely emaciated, weighing just 87 pounds. Her body told a story of prolonged torture. She had a brand on her shoulder, her nose was broken, and she was covered in bruises, burns, and rashes. Her long blonde hair had been chopped off. She was bound with restraints, and a chain was wrapped around her waist. The details Sherry provided to investigators painted a horrifying picture. She claimed she had been abducted at gunpoint by 2 Hispanic women who kept her chained in a closet. She described how they would play loud music, beat her, and deprive her of food. She recounted how they branded her, cut her hair, and subjected her to various forms of psychological torture. According to Sherry, her captors eventually drove her to the location where she was found and pushed her out of a vehicle before speeding away. The story captivated the nation. Who would target this young mother? What could possibly be the motive? Law enforcement launched a massive investigation, following every lead and potential connection. But as months passed, inconsistencies began to emerge. Investigators found male DNA on Sherry's clothing, not matching her husband, contradicting her story about female captors. Cell phone records showed unusual patterns. Gradually, investigators started questioning the narrative. For years, the case remained officially open while investigators worked quietly behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Sherry and Keith collected victim compensation funds, and Keith started a GoFundMe campaign that raised over $49,000 for the family. In 2020, 4 years after the alleged kidnapping, FBI agents interviewed Sherry again. This time, they presented evidence that contradicted her story. The pressure mounted. Finally, in 2022, the truth emerged. There had been no kidnapping. No Hispanic women. No torture chamber. Sherry Papini had fabricated the entire ordeal. The investigation revealed that Sherry had been staying with an ex-boyfriend in Costa Mesa, California, during her supposed captivity. She had meticulously planned her disappearance, communicating with the ex-boyfriend using prepaid phones. The injuries on her body were self-inflicted or caused with the help of her ex-boyfriend at her request. In April 2022, Sherry Papini pleaded guilty to mail fraud and making false statements to federal officers. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay over $300,000 in restitution. For nearly 6 years, she maintained her fabrication, allowing her community to fear that dangerous kidnappers were at large. She let her husband believe she had been tortured. She caused law enforcement to spend countless hours and resources searching for phantom assailants. What would drive someone to such elaborate deception? This question lingered in the minds of everyone involved. Psychological evaluation suggested Sherry suffered from complex issues, including severe anxiety, depression, and traits of various personality disorders. In March 2022, as the case against her was building, Sherry finally confessed to her husband. Their marriage did not survive the revelation. 9 years after the incident that gripped the nation, Sherry Papini has finally broken her silence. In her first interview since the hoax was exposed, she attempts to explain the inexplicable, why she created such an elaborate lie and maintained it for so long. "I didn't know how to stop," she admitted. "The lie became bigger than me. I felt trapped in the story I had created." Sherry described a spiral of mental health issues, childhood trauma, and a desperate need for attention that culminated in the extreme action of faking her own kidnapping. She acknowledged the immense harm she caused to her family, the community, and the resources wasted by law enforcement. Now divorced and having served her prison sentence, Sherry claims to be focused on rebuilding her life and repairing her relationship with her children, who were just 2 and 4 years old when the incident occurred. They're now approaching their teenage years, living with their father, and grappling with understanding their mother's actions. "The hardest part is knowing what I've done to my children," she said. "They didn't ask for any of this." The case of Sherry Papini serves as a troubling reminder of how deception can spiral out of control. What began as a fabrication evolved into a national sensation that damaged lives and diverted crucial resources away from genuine victims. As rain continues to fall outside, remember that sometimes the most disturbing stories aren't about the monsters lurking in shadows, but about the darkness we harbor within ourselves. The capacity for deception, not just of others, but of ourselves, can lead down paths more twisted than any fictional tale. Story 2. It was supposed to be a routine business trip for a woman traveling alone. The kind of trip she'd taken dozens of times before, checking into a hotel, attending meetings, and returning to a clean, anonymous room at day's end. A temporary home away from home, with all the expected comforts and, most importantly, safety. The hotel was unremarkable, one of those mid-range establishments that dot highways across America. Clean enough, comfortable enough, forgettable enough. She checked in, placed her suitcase on the luggage rack, and went about her evening routine. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But as night fell, something changed. At first, it was barely perceptible, a slight odor that seemed out of place. Not the usual hotel smell of industrial cleaning products and air conditioning. Something else. Something organic. She tried to ignore it, attributing it to the building's age or perhaps the previous occupant. As hours passed, the smell intensified. She sprayed perfume, opened a window, even called the front desk to ask if there might be an issue with the plumbing. They assured her everything was fine but offered to move her to another room if she preferred. Tired from travel and already settled in, she declined. That night, she slept fitfully, the strange odor periodically rousing her from sleep. By morning, she had convinced herself it was nothing serious, perhaps something in the ventilation system or from a neighboring room. She left for her meetings, spending the entire day away from the hotel. When she returned that evening, she immediately noticed that the smell had grown worse. Much worse. It was no longer something she could dismiss or mask with perfume. It was unmistakable and concerning. This time, she methodically began searching the room, checking the bathroom, the closet, the air vents. Finding nothing, she dropped to her knees and lifted the bed skirt to peer beneath the bed. What she saw made her blood run cold. A pair of eyes stared back at her from the darkness. There was a man hiding under her bed. Her scream pierced the quiet of the hotel room as she scrambled backward. The man emerged from his hiding place, disheveled, reeking, his eyes wild and unfocused. Later, she would describe him as being in his 30s, wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. In those terrifying moments between discovery and escape, time seemed to stretch. The man stood between her and the door. She later couldn't recall exactly what happened next, whether he spoke to her or lunged toward her, only that somehow she managed to dart around him and flee into the hallway, screaming for help. Hotel staff responded quickly. Security arrived, the police were called, and the man was apprehended as he attempted to escape through a service entrance. The investigation revealed a disturbing truth: the man had been living in the hotel, moving from room to room, hiding under beds or in closets, emerging only when occupants were away to steal food from minibars and use bathroom facilities. Hotel surveillance footage showed he had been in the building for at least 3 days, possibly longer. He had developed a system for identifying which rooms were occupied by single travelers, particularly targeting women who appeared to be on business trips, people who would be out of their rooms for predictable periods. More disturbing still was what authorities found in his possession: a small notebook containing information about previous room occupants, their apparent schedules, items they had in their rooms, even notes about conversations they had on their phones. He had been watching, listening, cataloging. The man, identified as a local transient with a history of breaking and entering charges, had found a way to bypass the hotel's electronic key card system by tampering with service doors. He would enter rooms during housekeeping hours when doors were often propped open. For the woman who discovered him, the nightmare didn't end with his arrest. She was moved to another hotel immediately, but the psychological impact lingered. The violation of her private space, the knowledge that while she slept a stranger watched, the realization that her personal belongings had been examined and touched, these thoughts haunted her. "I can't stay in hotels anymore," she later told reporters. "I check under the bed every night in my own home now. I wake up thinking someone is watching me." The hotel faced serious questions about security protocols. How could someone live undetected on the premises for days? Why didn't housekeeping notice signs of intrusion? The case prompted many hotel chains to review their security measures, particularly around service entrances and during room cleaning procedures. What makes this case particularly disturbing isn't just the invasion of privacy, but the calculated nature of it. This wasn't a one-time opportunistic break-in. It was a systematic operation by someone who had found a way to exist in the shadows of everyday life, observing the private moments of strangers without their knowledge. The man was eventually charged with multiple counts of burglary, voyeurism, and trespassing. During questioning, he revealed little about his motivations, saying only that hotels were easy, and that he liked watching people when they didn't know. For travelers everywhere, the case served as a chilling reminder that the spaces we temporarily inhabit carry histories we know nothing about. The beds we sleep in, the rooms we occupy, they have witnessed countless stories before ours, some of which might be darker than we care to imagine. As you listen to the rain tonight, take comfort in knowing you're safe in your own space. But perhaps, before you drift off to sleep, it wouldn't hurt to check beneath your bed. Just to be sure. Story 3. In the quiet suburb of Fairfield Township, New Jersey, where neighbors know each other by name and children play freely in front yards, an act of violence shattered the community's sense of security and raised difficult questions about justice, protection, and the lengths to which a parent might go to defend their child. The morning began like any other in this peaceful neighborhood. Families prepared for work and school, coffee brewed in kitchens, and cars backed out of driveways. Nothing suggested that by day's end, one man would be dead and another's life forever altered by a moment of explosive rage. At the center of this tragedy were two families. On one side, a father and his 13-year-old daughter. On the other, a 43-year-old man named Christopher Diaz with a troubling past. The events that led to the fatal confrontation began when the 13-year-old girl reported something deeply disturbing to her father. She told him that Diaz had approached her while she was walking home from school and made inappropriate S@Zul comments. He had followed her for several blocks, continuing his unwanted advances despite her obvious discomfort and attempts to ignore him. The father, whose name has been withheld to protect his daughter's identity, immediately contacted the police to report the incident. Officers took a statement and assured the family they would investigate. They advised the father to let the legal system handle the matter and warned against any confrontation. But the next day, something happened that pushed the situation beyond a point of no return. The father spotted Diaz near their home, watching his daughter from across the street. Something inside him snapped. Grabbing a baseball bat from his garage, the father approached Diaz. Words were exchanged, though accounts differ as to exactly what was said. Witnesses reported hearing shouting, with the father demanding that Diaz stay away from his daughter. The confrontation escalated rapidly. The father, overcome with protective fury, struck Diaz multiple times with the baseball bat. Neighbors who heard the commotion called 911, but by the time emergency services arrived, Diaz was unresponsive on the sidewalk, bleeding heavily from head wounds. Despite paramedics' efforts to save him, Christopher Diaz was pronounced dead at the scene. When police arrived, they found the father still holding the bloody baseball bat, making no attempt to flee. He surrendered immediately, reportedly telling officers, "I had to protect my daughter." The investigation that followed uncovered troubling information about the deceased. Christopher Diaz had a criminal record that included previous allegations of inappropriate behavior toward minors. He was a registered sex offender who had served time for similar offenses. Due to a legal technicality, he had been released from supervision just months before the incident. This revelation complicated the case significantly. For many in the community, the father's actions, while extreme, seemed understandable, a natural protective response from a parent facing a clear threat to his child. Signs appeared in yards reading, "Free him," and "He protected his child." An online fundraiser for his legal defense raised over $50,000 within days. Others, including law enforcement officials, emphasized that vigilante justice cannot be condoned, regardless of circumstances. They pointed out that the proper response would have been to contact authorities again about Diaz's presence near the family home. The district attorney's office faced a difficult decision. After weeks of deliberation, they charged the father with second-degree manslaughter rather than murder, acknowledging the mitigating circumstances while still maintaining that the law must be upheld. The case never went to trial. In a plea agreement that reflected the complexity of the situation, the father pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and received a sentence of 5 years probation with no jail time, provided he attend anger management counseling and perform community service. The judge, in delivering the sentence, noted, "This court cannot condone taking the law into one's own hands, but neither can it ignore the natural protective instinct of a parent." This sentence reflects both the serious nature of the act and the extraordinary circumstances that led to it. For the community, the case left lingering questions about the balance between protection and justice. For the family at the center of it all, the consequences continue to ripple outward. The daughter required extensive therapy to process not only the initial harassment but also the knowledge that her report led indirectly to a man's death and her father's legal troubles. The father, now serving his probation, has spoken only once publicly about the incident. "I would do anything to protect my child," he said. "But I wish I had made a different choice that day. Violence solved nothing, and now 2 families are broken." As this rain continues to fall against your window, consider how quickly life can change, how a single decision made in a moment of intense emotion can alter the course of many lives. The line between protection and vengeance, between justice and retribution, is often thinner than we might imagine. Story 4. The mountains surrounding Lake Tahoe stand as silent sentinels, watching over the deep blue waters and the lives that unfold along its shores. Their beauty draws people from across the country, tourists, nature lovers, and those seeking the perfect backdrop for celebration. In winter, when snow blankets the peaks, this natural splendor reaches its pinnacle, creating a postcard-perfect setting for gatherings of all kinds. It was against this breathtaking backdrop that a group of friends decided to rent a luxury cabin for Super Bowl weekend. Their plan was simple: enjoy the game, celebrate afterward, and make memories in one of America's most beautiful locations. The rental property was everything they had hoped for: a spacious mountain lodge with panoramic views of the lake, multiple bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and an outdoor hot tub perfect for the cold February evening. The friends, most in their late 20s and early 30s, had been planning this weekend for months. Some were old college roommates, others colleagues from work, all connected through years of friendship. Super Bowl Sunday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and fresh snow on the ground. The group stocked the kitchen with food and drinks, set up multiple viewing areas for the game, and prepared for what should have been an unforgettable evening of friendship and celebration. By all accounts, the game-watching portion of the evening went as planned. Photos later recovered from phones showed smiling faces, friendly toasts, and the typical festive atmosphere of a Super Bowl party. No one could have predicted that within hours, 4 of them would be dead and several others fighting for their lives. The trouble began after the game ended. As the night progressed and the celebration continued, someone brought out cocaine, a substance some in the group had used recreationally before. What they didn't know was that this particular batch contained fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. Just a few grains, equivalent to a few grains of salt, can be lethal. The first signs of trouble appeared around 3 a.m. One of the guests, a 29-year-old software engineer named Michael, began showing symptoms of an overdose: slow, irregular breathing, blue-tinged lips, and unresponsiveness. His girlfriend attempted CPR while another friend called 911, but the remote location of the cabin meant emergency services would take precious time to arrive. Before paramedics could reach the scene, 3 others began showing identical symptoms. The remaining friends, many intoxicated themselves and unfamiliar with the signs of opioid overdose, did their best to help, performing CPR, placing the affected individuals in recovery positions, desperately trying to keep them breathing until help arrived. The first emergency responders reached the cabin at 3:42 a.m., but by then, 2 people had already stopped breathing entirely. Despite the immediate administration of Narcan, naloxone, a medication designed to rapidly reverse opioid overdose, they could not be revived. By morning, 4 people were dead: Michael, 29, Teresa, 31, an elementary school teacher, Daniel, 28, a recent law school graduate, and Sophia, 27, a nurse. 3 others were hospitalized in critical condition but eventually recovered. The investigation that followed revealed several tragic facts. First, none of the deceased had knowingly taken fentanyl. They believed they were using cocaine. Second, testing showed the substance contained a lethal amount of fentanyl, enough that even a small amount would likely prove fatal. And finally, some of the deceased had never used drugs before, having made a one-time decision that cost them their lives. For the families of the victims, the news was incomprehensible. Parents who had spoken to their children just hours earlier about the game were now planning funerals. Partners who expected their loved ones home the next day were instead clearing out their belongings from shared apartments. Teresa's mother spoke to reporters through tears. "My daughter was a teacher who loved her students. She made one mistake, and now she's gone forever. How do I explain to her 3rd graders that their teacher isn't coming back?" Daniel's fiancée revealed they had been planning their wedding for the following summer. "We had everything picked out, the venue, the flowers, even our first dance song. Now I'm picking out his burial suit instead of his tuxedo." The investigation to find the source of the fentanyl-laced cocaine stretched on for months. Eventually, authorities arrested a mid-level dealer who had knowingly mixed the substances to increase potency while keeping costs down. He now faces multiple charges of homicide. The case highlighted the growing crisis of fentanyl contamination in recreational drugs across America. What makes this particular situation so disturbing is the randomness of it. The victims weren't regular drug users or addicts seeking increasingly potent substances. They were ordinary people whose lives ended because of a single decision made during what should have been a carefree celebration. In the aftermath, the surviving friends established a foundation in memory of the deceased, focusing on education about the dangers of fentanyl and providing resources for testing recreational drugs. They traveled to colleges and high schools sharing their story, hoping to prevent others from experiencing the same tragedy. One survivor, James, carries the weight of being the one who brought the cocaine to the party, though he had no knowledge of its contamination. "I live with this every day," he said during a public awareness event. "Every morning I wake up and remember that 4 of my friends are dead because of something I brought into that house. I didn't know, but that doesn't bring them back." The beautiful Lake Tahoe cabin still stands, but the property management company had difficulty renting it after the incident became public knowledge. Eventually, it was sold to a new owner who renovated extensively, hoping to erase the memory of what happened there. But for those connected to the tragedy, no renovation can erase their memories. For empty chairs at family gatherings. For voices missing from group chats. For futures erased in a single night against the beautiful backdrop of Lake Tahoe. As the rain falls outside tonight, remember how quickly life can change, how decisions made in moments of celebration can sometimes lead to irreversible consequences. For lives ended not because of deliberate self-destruction, but because of invisible danger in what they thought was a known substance. Story 5. Children should never have to witness violence between their parents. They should never have to become the key witnesses in a murder trial. They should never have to recount, in trembling voices, how one parent took the life of another. Yet this is exactly what happened to an 8-year-old boy in a case that shocked the community and highlighted the devastating impact of domestic violence on the youngest members of a family. In a modest suburban home that appeared normal from the outside, a family's private struggles erupted into lethal violence one evening in February. Christopher McCullough, 42, a man with no previous criminal record, a steady job at a local factory, and a reputation as a quiet neighbor, would stand trial for the brutal murder of his wife, Emma. The couple's relationship had been deteriorating for months, according to friends and family members who later testified. Financial pressures, Christopher's increasing alcohol consumption, and Emma's decision to consult a divorce attorney had created a powder keg of tension in the household. On the night of February 17, that tension exploded. The couple's 3 children, ages 8, 6, and 4, were home when an argument began in the kitchen. The exact catalyst for the fight remains unclear, but what is known is that it quickly escalated beyond anything the family had experienced before. The oldest child, their son, would later become the prosecution's key witness. While his younger siblings hid in a bedroom closet, he witnessed the unthinkable through a partially open door. His testimony, delivered with the help of a child advocate and recorded to spare him the trauma of testifying in open court, provided the most complete account of what transpired that night. "Dad was yelling really loud," the boy recounted in the recording played during the trial. "Mom was crying and trying to get to the phone. Dad grabbed it and threw it against the wall. Then he pushed her down." What followed, according to the child's account, was a sustained and brutal assault. Christopher McCullough beat his wife first with his fists, then with a kitchen chair that splintered under the force of the blows. Emma McCullough died of blunt force trauma to the head and internal bleeding. Perhaps most chilling was the boy's description of the aftermath. "After Mom stopped moving, Dad sat at the table and drank a beer. He was breathing really hard. Then he saw me and said to go back to my room, that Mom was sleeping and would be fine in the morning." The children remained in the house with their father and their mother's body for nearly 7 hours before Christopher McCullough finally called 911, claiming he had come home to find his wife injured from an apparent fall. But the physical evidence and, most damningly, his son's account made the truth impossible to deny. During the trial, the defense attempted to portray the killing as a crime of passion, arguing that Christopher had snapped under extreme emotional distress when Emma allegedly revealed plans to take the children and leave the state. They pushed for a manslaughter conviction rather than murder. The prosecution, however, pointed to several factors suggesting premeditation. Christopher had changed the passwords on their joint bank accounts 2 days earlier, had recently increased his life insurance policy on Emma, and had made inquiries about custody laws in their state. Throughout the proceedings, child psychologists worked intensively with the 3 children, particularly the oldest, who struggled with both the trauma of witnessing the murder and the guilt of testifying against his father. Experts explained to the jury the devastating psychological impact of such experiences on developing minds. "These children are suffering from complex trauma," testified Dr. Eleanor Whitman, a child psychologist. They're grieving the loss of their mother while simultaneously processing the fact that their father is responsible. The older boy has taken on inappropriate responsibility, believing he should have somehow protected his mother. These psychological wounds will require years of treatment. After a 2-week trial that captured national attention, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Christopher McCullough was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the children, the end of the trial marked the beginning of a different journey. With both parents effectively gone from their lives, they entered the custody of Emma's sister and her husband, who moved into the children's home to provide stability and continuity in an attempt to minimize further disruption. The aftermath of the case prompted the local school district to implement enhanced training for teachers on recognizing signs of domestic violence in students' homes. The district attorney's office established a specialized unit for cases involving child witnesses, with protocols designed to reduce additional trauma during the legal process. But for the 3 children at the center of this tragedy, particularly the boy who bore witness to his mother's final moments, the impact cannot be measured in policy changes or court verdicts. School counselors reported that he rarely spoke about the incident but expressed his feelings through artwork, dark, chaotic drawings that reflected his inner turmoil. His aunt shared during a victim impact statement, "He wakes up screaming most nights. He asks me if he could have saved his mom if he'd been braver, if he'd tried to stop his dad. No child should ever have to ask such questions." As this case reminds us, domestic violence creates ripples that extend far beyond the immediate victims. Children who witness such violence carry those images into their futures, shaping their understanding of relationships, trust, and safety in ways that can last a lifetime. Listen to the rain outside your window tonight, and remember the children sleeping in homes where violence lurks beneath the surface of ordinary life. For some, the monsters aren't under the bed or in the closet, they're at the dinner table, behind the wheel of the family car, reading bedtime stories with hands that may turn violent when anger rises. Story 6. Tanya Miller had always been confident about her appearance, but after turning 40, she began to notice changes that troubled her when she looked in the mirror. The once subtle lines around her eyes had deepened. Her cheeks seemed less full, her jawline less defined. These natural signs of aging bothered her more than she expected. A divorced mother of 2 teenage daughters working as an administrative assistant at a local accounting firm, Tanya didn't have the financial resources for the expensive cosmetic procedures she researched online. The quotes she received from board-certified plastic surgeons for facial fillers and implants were well beyond her budget. But Tanya was determined. When a coworker mentioned a miracle worker operating out of a private residence who charged a fraction of standard medical prices, her interest was immediately piqued. The coworker showed off her recent lip augmentation, which looked impressively natural. "She's not officially licensed in this state," the coworker confided, "but she trained in South America and has been doing this for years. Everyone I know who's gone to her looks amazing afterward." Under normal circumstances, such red flags might have given Tanya pause. But the combination of her growing insecurity and the financial accessibility proved too tempting. She took the phone number and made the call. The woman who answered identified herself as Dr. Isabella Rodriguez and spoke with a slight accent that seemed to confirm her international medical background. She was warm, reassuring, and knowledgeable about various cosmetic procedures. When Tanya expressed interest in cheek implants and facial fillers, Dr. Rodriguez quoted a price less than a third of what legitimate clinics had offered. They scheduled an appointment for the following week at what Rodriguez described as her private practice, in reality, a converted basement in a suburban home. When Tanya arrived, she was surprised by the setting but reassured by the seemingly professional equipment and the certificates displayed on the wall, documents that, had she been able to read Spanish, would have revealed themselves as unrelated to plastic surgery or medicine. Rodriguez examined Tanya's face with apparent expertise, marking injection sites with a pen and discussing the improvements they would make. She showed Tanya before and after photos of previous clients, all looking remarkably rejuvenated. "I use only the best products," Rodriguez assured her. "Imported directly from Europe. Much better than what they allow in America. What Rodriguez didn't mention was that these imported products were industrial-grade silicone mixed with mineral oil, a combination never approved for medical use and known to cause severe inflammatory reactions, infections, and even death when injected into human tissue. Tanya lay back on the examination table as Rodriguez prepared the injections. There was no medical assistant present, no proper sterilization protocols observed. The procedure took less than an hour. Tanya experienced some discomfort, but Rodriguez assured her this was normal. "You'll see some swelling for a few days, but by next week, you'll look 10 years younger," she promised, collecting the cash payment of $1,200. By the time Tanya reached home, the pain had intensified significantly. Her face felt hot and tight, and the swelling seemed excessive. When she called Rodriguez, she was told these were normal reactions and was advised to take over-the-counter pain medication. But by morning, Tanya's condition had deteriorated dramatically. Her face was grossly swollen, she had developed a high fever, and she found herself struggling to remain conscious. Her older daughter, returning from an overnight stay at a friend's house, found her mother semi-responsive on the bathroom floor and immediately called 911. At the hospital, doctors were alarmed by Tanya's condition. Initial assessments indicated severe inflammation and probable infection, but it wasn't until they learned about the cosmetic procedure that the full gravity of the situation became clear. The unknown substances injected into Tanya's face were causing a catastrophic immune response. Despite aggressive intervention with antibiotics, anti-inflammatory medications, and efforts to remove as much of the foreign material as possible, Tanya's condition continued to worsen. The substances had migrated beyond the targeted areas, causing widespread tissue damage. Within 48 hours of her admission, she was placed on a ventilator. By the third day, doctors informed her family that she was showing signs of brain death due to septic shock. 5 days after her cosmetic procedure, Tanya Miller was declared legally dead. She never regained consciousness to explain to her daughters why she had taken such a risk. The investigation that followed revealed that Dr. Isabella Rodriguez was actually Elena Vasquez, a former dental assistant with no medical training whatsoever. She had been operating her illegal cosmetic surgery business for nearly 3 years, performing hundreds of procedures ranging from Botox injections, using counterfeit products, to more invasive treatments like the facial implants that killed Tanya. When authorities raided her home, they discovered industrial silicone, lidocaine purchased from veterinary supply companies, and numerous other non-medical grade substances. They also found a ledger indicating she had served over 500 clients, grossing nearly $400,000 in cash. Further investigation revealed that at least 15 other clients had been hospitalized with serious complications, though Tanya's case was the first fatality. One woman permanently lost vision in one eye when silicone migrated to her ocular blood vessels. Another required extensive reconstructive surgery after developing necrosis in facial tissue. Vasquez was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including practicing medicine without a license, aggravated assault, and second-degree murder in Tanya's death. During questioning, she showed little remorse, insisting she had helped many women feel beautiful, and that complications were rare. "I gave them what they wanted at prices they could afford," she told investigators. "They knew I wasn't a regular doctor." The district attorney disagreed. This woman deliberately misrepresented herself as a medical professional and injected hazardous substances into people's bodies for profit, the prosecutor stated at a press conference. Her actions were not just illegal, they were unconscionable. Vasquez ultimately pleaded guilty to reduced charges to avoid a trial and received a 20-year prison sentence. But for Tanya Miller's family, no punishment could reverse their loss. Tanya's daughters, aged 16 and 18 at the time of her death, were left to navigate life without their mother. The older daughter delayed college plans to help care for her sister. Both underwent counseling to process their grief and the circumstances surrounding their mother's death. "I wish she had known how beautiful she already was to us," her younger daughter said during the sentencing hearing. "I would give anything to tell her that one more time." The case prompted local health authorities to launch awareness campaigns about the dangers of unlicensed cosmetic procedures, particularly in communities where cost barriers might drive people to seek dangerous alternatives. Medical professionals noted a disturbing trend. As cosmetic procedures become more normalized and visible through social media, the demand has increased dramatically. But with high prices at legitimate clinics, underground providers have flourished, particularly in states with less rigorous enforcement of medical licensing laws. What makes these cases so tragic is that they're entirely preventable, said Dr. Lauren Chen, a board-certified plastic surgeon who treated several of Vasquez's victims. These aren't necessary medical procedures, they're elective cosmetic choices that people are literally dying for. Tanya Miller's death certificate lists the cause as septic shock resulting from cosmetic procedure complications. But those who knew her situation understand that the true causes ran deeper, a toxic combination of societal pressure about aging, financial limitations, and the predatory practices of someone who exploited vulnerability for profit. As you listen to The Rain tonight, consider how the pursuit of external beauty can sometimes lead down dangerous paths. Tanya Miller's story serves as a reminder that our worth extends far beyond our appearance, a truth she tragically discovered too late. The Harper family home sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in a neighborhood where everybody knew each other's names. From the outside, the two-story colonial with its well-maintained garden and basketball hoop in the driveway appeared to be the epitome of suburban tranquility. But inside those walls, a different reality had been unfolding for years. Elizabeth Harper, 38, had been married to James for 15 years. They had 3 children together, Lily, 14, Mason, 11, and Emma, 8, to friends, neighbors, and even extended family. James Harper presented himself as a devoted husband and father. He coached Mason's baseball team, never missed a school conference, and was active in community events. But behind closed doors, James was controlling, manipulative, and increasingly violent. What began as verbal aggression had gradually escalated to physical abuse, always carefully hidden from the outside world. Elizabeth covered bruises with makeup, explained away injuries as accidents, and maintained the facade of a happy marriage. The children knew the truth, though. They had witnessed their father's rage, had seen their mother cowering, had heard the arguments that erupted over seemingly trivial matters. Each of them had developed their own coping mechanisms. Lily became fiercely protective of her siblings, Mason grew withdrawn and anxious, and Emma developed elaborate fantasy worlds to escape into. Elizabeth had contemplated leaving many times but faced the barriers common to many abuse victims: financial dependence, James controlled all their money, fear for her safety and her children's well-being, and the deep shame that kept her from reaching out for help. James had also threatened that if she ever left, he would take the children and she would never see them again. The situation reached a breaking point on a rainy Tuesday night in April. The catalyst was something small, a dinner that wasn't ready when James returned home from work. His anger escalated rapidly, and this time, something in Elizabeth snapped. Instead of apologizing and trying to placate him as she usually did, she stood her ground. "I'm tired of walking on eggshells in my own home," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "This has to stop." James's reaction was immediate and violent. He struck Elizabeth across the face with such force that she fell against the kitchen counter. Then he grabbed her by the throat and began to squeeze, his face contorted with rage. "I've given you everything," he shouted. "And this is how you thank me." What James didn't realize was that the children were not upstairs as he assumed. They had been in the adjacent family room and witnessed everything. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The 3 children, who had been passive witnesses to their mother's abuse for years, sprang into action together. Lily, the oldest, acted first. She grabbed her father's arm, trying to pull him away from her mother. "Stop it. You're hurting her," she screamed. James, momentarily startled by his daughter's intervention, loosened his grip on Elizabeth's throat. But his surprise quickly turned to anger as he shoved Lily roughly aside, causing her to stumble and fall. That's when Mason, the quiet middle child who had always been afraid of his father, found unexpected courage. He ran to the kitchen cabinet where Elizabeth kept her cell phone hidden for emergencies. a precaution she had arranged with the children, though she had hoped they would never need to use it. Mason grabbed the phone and dialed 911, his voice shaking as he reported, "My dad is hurting my mom. Please come quick." Meanwhile, the youngest child, Emma, demonstrated remarkable presence of mind. She ran to the front door and unlocked it so the police could enter easily. Then she rushed back to the kitchen, where James had resumed his assault on Elizabeth, who was now on the floor, struggling to breathe as he loomed over her. In a move that would later be described by a responding officer as extraordinarily brave, Emma grabbed a heavy fruit bowl from the counter and smashed it against her father's back. The distraction gave Lily enough time to help her mother to her feet. Bleeding from a cut on her forehead and gasping for breath, Elizabeth gathered her children and retreated to the bathroom, where they locked themselves in until police arrived 7 minutes later. When officers entered the home, they found James pacing in the living room, still seething with anger. He attempted to portray the situation as a minor domestic dispute, claiming his wife had attacked him. But the children's testimony, Elizabeth's visible injuries, and the 911 call told a different story. James Harper was arrested and charged with domestic assault and battery by strangulation, a felony in their state. Elizabeth, after receiving medical treatment for her injuries, filed for an emergency protective order that same night. The weeks that followed were challenging for the family. Elizabeth and the children moved temporarily into a domestic violence shelter while legal proceedings began. For the first time, Elizabeth opened up to a counselor about the years of abuse she had endured. With the support of victim advocates, she began to rebuild her life, opening her own bank account, securing a restraining order, and filing for divorce. The children, too, received specialized counseling to help them process their experiences. Their therapist noted that while they carried emotional scars from witnessing years of abuse, their collective action to save their mother represented a critical turning point in their healing. What's remarkable about this case, the therapist later wrote in a journal article, with the family's permission and identities concealed, is how these siblings, each with their own trauma responses, united in a moment of crisis. Their actions not only saved their mother physically but broke the cycle of helplessness that often characterizes families experiencing domestic violence. James Harper eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with additional probation time and mandatory participation in a batterer's intervention program upon release. The judge also granted Elizabeth full custody of the children, with any future visitation rights for James to be strictly supervised and contingent upon completion of treatment programs. 6 months after that fateful night, Elizabeth and her children moved into a new home across town. Elizabeth found a job as an administrative assistant at a local business and began taking college courses online. The children were enrolled in new schools where nobody knew their history, giving them the opportunity for a fresh start. Recovery has not been linear for any of them. Mason still struggles with anxiety, Lily has trust issues in her relationships with peers, and Emma occasionally has nightmares. Elizabeth, too, has her difficult days, working through the trauma of 15 years of abuse. But there are also signs of healing and growth. The family attends therapy together, learning healthier communication patterns and rebuilding their sense of safety. They've established new traditions and routines that help restore normalcy to their lives. Perhaps most significantly, their relationship with each other has transformed. The shared experience of that night, of standing together against abuse, created a powerful bond between mother and children. They speak more openly now, their home no longer a place of secrets and fear. "My children saved my life," Elizabeth told her support group, tears in her eyes. "Not just physically that night, but they saved me from spending the rest of my life in fear. They showed me what courage looks like." For the Harper children, their mother's words hold special significance. Having grown up believing they were powerless to stop their father's violence, they discovered their own strength in a moment of crisis. Their story reminds us that even in the darkest situations, the human capacity for courage and protection of loved ones can emerge in unexpected ways. As the rain falls gently outside your window tonight, remember the Harper family, not for the years of suffering they endured, but for the moment they reclaimed their power and began to build a new life together, free from violence and fear. As our journey through these 7 disturbing true stories comes to an end, the rain outside your window continues its gentle rhythm. Each drop represents a moment in time, some ordinary, some extraordinary, some tragic. These stories remind us of the complexity of human experience, how quickly circumstances can change, how darkness can hide behind normal facades, and how resilience can emerge from unimaginable situations. From fabricated kidnappings to hidden intruders, from protective rage to fatal celebrations, from witnessed violence to dangerous deceptions, and finally to triumphant courage, each tale offers a glimpse into the extremes of human behavior and circumstance. As you drift toward sleep, perhaps there's comfort in knowing that for every act of darkness in this world, there are countless acts of light, of courage, of protection, of healing, and of justice. The rain will continue long after these stories end, just as life continues beyond moments of crisis. Let the steady sound carry you into peaceful rest, a reminder of nature's constants in a world of uncertainty. And if this kept you listening, if the stories echoed in the rhythm of the rain, subscribe, like the video, and come back. Because there's another case, one that will follow you into your dreams. It's the darkest I've ever told. Sleep well, and remember that dawn always follows even the darkest night.